Welcome into the Hot Read podcast here live on a Tuesday, October the 29th. Oh, only 2 days until Halloween. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at Broadway Sports Media. You can follow me at JT_Ruhnke. I'm once again joined by my lovely co-host, who is a lot more festive and in for the occasion than I am right now, Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief of Sobros Network, 1/3 of football and other F words, and co-writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, how are you doing today? I like the shirt. I like that we continue to keep 440, the brand, lively with our outfit choices. Obviously, I'm dressed as every white male podcaster. That's my costume this year. That's what I decided to go with today. But I see you have brought a little bit more pizzazz to the show.
Well, 'tis the season, JT. I'm happy. This is my favorite time of the year. This October through New Year's range. I'm in the spirit. I'm feeling great. I haven't listened to hardly any sports talk for the last 2 days. I haven't tuned into any Titans related stuff. I've been watching Garrett Nussmeier film. I've been watching Luther Burden III film, kind of prepping for another draft notebook column. And I've just kind of stayed out of all this stuff. I made my position known, how I feel about the state of the Titans right now, and I just backed off. I let everybody hurl their tomatoes at me, and I just got out of the way, and I just dipped. I got out of there, and it's been great for my mental health because I haven't been down in the sewers that Titans Twitter has been the last couple of days.
That's probably the best way to do it at this point. Just like throw a flashbang into a room, into an angry mob of people, into one big room of Titans fans, and then run away. But yes, I someday or another, you will have to face the music, as Glory Day Sports is joining us in the chat here saying, I've been out of the loop. Are we still hurling tomatoes at Stoney? I believe that we are, as Stoney, you've commented in the chat here. I believe that is still happening. So it's time for Stoney and for, myself as well to face the music and get back into the sports talk market here in Nashville today. With probably a little bit more optimism than you probably are hearing from a lot of other people from around the Nashville area. I know that after a 52-14 loss, it probably is just what you want to hear, which is a bunch of rage and doom and gloom. And as Daniel in the comments here, earlier in the year, he came up with a one-word answer of anger. Daniel has come back now and is feeling what I think a lot of Titans fans are feeling, which is despair. I think that is where we are, but we can always look to the future, and I think that's what we are going to do today, as well as poke some fun at the Indianapolis Colts, which we'll touch on later, as well as something I found pretty interesting that ties the Colts situation back into Will Levis and the Titans. But a few housekeeping things before we continue. If you are joining us on this show, whether you are on Twitter or on Facebook, do us a favor and head on over to the Broadway Sports Media or 440 YouTube channel, where you can join people like Daniel and Gershon and Eddie and Glory Day Sports over there in the comments section. Eddie saying, "It was good, boys. All are aboard the train." That's a nice one. Nice. There. I'm sure that we are going to continue to brainstorm some of those names as we keep going here. And then got to give a big shout out to our sponsor of the show, Sinkers Beverages, who continues to provide this show to you guys free of charge twice a week, every single week. If you are a fan of the 440 Sports Network, you know them very well, but if not, and joining us for the first time to come in here and hurl your tomatoes or tell me and Stoney we don't know what we're talking about, well, I have one of the best liquor stores in Nashville to tell you about and send you over there to drown all of your sorrows responsibly, I may add. But thank you to Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show. More on them later. Stoney, something that we talked about over the weekend, I think after this game, this outcome was not expected. Like, I don't understand why people think that this wasn't the outcome we thought it would be. You're going up against basically the best NFC team and probably one of the top 2 Super Bowl contenders outside of the undefeated Kansas City Chiefs right now, and you are a team that is reeling, looking for any like source of hope or life, and you walk into their territory, and I don't see how you could have expected anything else from this team this week, losing 52-14. However, I think the biggest thing to me is that I expected this score. I didn't expect this score to happen the way it did. And that comes on the heels of someone looking at, if you're box score scouting, it seems almost impossible, right, for this score. How could a team, going up against the Lions, who averaged 33.4 points a game and hung 52 on the Tennessee first-ranked defense, they only produced 225 yards of total offense to the Titans' 416 yards. How could a team win by 38 points on 191 fewer yards? And I think the answer there is it lies in the details, and it comes down to the special teams that we saw this week. We've seen a lot of faults from the special teams, and deservedly so. They deserve the criticism and everything that's coming at them this week. But just a couple of fun stats here that makes this Titans game against the Lions this past Sunday just ever more bizarre. Benjamin Solak on Twitter, who works for ESPN, put this out earlier this week, during the game, I should say, and he said, in just the first half against the Titans, the Lions have 4 touchdown drives of 25 or fewer yards. This is the only full game in the True Media Sports database since 2000 to have 4+ touchdown drives of 25 or fewer yards. He followed that up with by saying, with a forced fumble and subsequent touchdown, the Lions are now the first team ever with 5 touchdowns drives of 30 or fewer yards in a single game. And that kind of tells the tale for a team that simply looked good at the beginning, but self-inflicted wounds could not keep them going against this Detroit team.
Yeah, and I think it's not a stretch to say this is probably the best the passing game has looked all season long in a 52-14 loss. It sounds crazy, but man, they were moving the ball well in the first half of that game, and they looked pretty competitive at 14-14. And then, everything just kind of went off the rails there. But I do think this is the best team in the NFL we're talking about here when we're talking about the Detroit Lions. When you look at every level of the offense and the defense, every position, I think you check just about every box in favor of the Lions. It was an overwhelming matchup, and I wrote about it after watching a little bit of Detroit tape last week, saying, hey, man, these guys are going to get pressure up the middle. They're going to play man. They are going to force tight window throws. They're going to create pressure. And then on offense, they're just going to simply overwhelm the defense. And it felt like that's kind of what happened in the second half, but it really is this fluky nature of this Titans team this season, where I liken it to what our good buddy Zach Lyons said on Cover 2 on 104.5 The Zone. It's like the cartoon where there's a leak in the dam and Bugs Bunny's up there putting his finger in one hole, and then a second hole springs open. He's got to put his finger in that one. And the next thing you know, he's using his ears and Lord knows what else to plug up those holes in the dam before the whole thing just cracks and just overwhelms him. That's kind of what this Titans offense feels like, or this Titans team feels like. It's like whack-a-mole. You knock one down and another problem pops up. This week it was the special teams. And I don't think the special teams have been particularly good all season long, but outright disastrous performance on Sunday from that unit. And we can get into the specifics of how, why, but it's just when everything is going wrong for you, it makes it so that there's a myriad of ways that you can lose a game. And so you're starting to see some of these fluky, weird kind of outcomes like this, where they really outpace the Lions on offense in terms of yardage big time, but they lose the game in dominant fashion. So it's listen, people came to me a few weeks ago. I think it might have been after the Dolphins game, because I went back and watched the tape, and I came on the show and I seemed pretty stoic, pretty melancholy even. Like, guys, I think it's over. Like, don't get your hopes up about that Dolphins win, because that was kind of a fluky win in hindsight. this is where I thought this team would be after watching 4 games of tape. And I had just concluded in my mind, I had made peace with it. This is the 2024 Tennessee Titans. This is the experience. Doesn't mean that they can't grow and get better, but I don't know how you trust this team to do much of anything right now with all of the holes in the ship.
Yeah, and it really comes down to, as much as you want to talk about it being whether it is a personnel issue or a coaching issue, it comes down to the execution of every single group. And because, like you said, when you poke all the holes in this sinking ship that is the Tennessee Titans 2024 season, like you see some growth. Like Brian Callahan, like this week, patched up maybe one of the biggest holes that they needed to patch up, which is getting Calvin Ridley going and getting your wide receiver one getting the ball, which he does pretty well. He gets, I believe, 10 receptions on 15 targets for 143 yards, something like that. You get him going, and he was a guy who was absolutely torching this Detroit Lions decent secondary. They were scheming up a lot of plays for Calvin Ridley to be open this week. And, you know, when you see that going and you have a dominant run game kind of working in the first half, you know, those are things that are the holes you're starting to see Brian Callahan and this offensive coaching staff fix. But another basically cannon size hole just breaks through half the boat, which is the special teams play in this game. And none of that matters anymore because you really can't focus on that, because now there's a even bigger pressing issue that you have to face, and that is the special teams and return game. You look at what the Detroit Lions were able to do on Sunday. You look at the kick returns that they were able to do. One kick return by Khalil Dorsey for 72 yards, and then you look at former Titan Khalif Raymond's returns. He had 5 punt returns for 190 yards and 1 touchdown, with his longest punt return coming with 90 total yards on 1 punt return. And so,
yeah,
even when you look at, you know, you take that one out of the equation, okay, you take that one out, that's still, you're allowing Khalif Raymond to average 25 yards on every punt. That is just simply unacceptable. And so I believe, you know, after the game, the outrage and on everything that has built up on the first year special teams coordinator Colt Anderson, everything that's built up on his plate kind of felt like we were going to hit the boiling point here, where it was going to boil over, and we were going to see the first coach on this new staff get kind of the kick out the door, say, see you later. This is just not working. But I think what we learned from Brian Callahan earlier this week when he talked on Monday, and as cooler heads prevailed, that really doesn't seem like it would have been the best option, because after that game, there really are 2 options here for this Titans team. Option A is you fire the young special teams coordinator for a quick jolt for your season that basically is already over at 1-6. How much is that really worth? What does that do to a locker room that you're already afraid is going to erupt and break apart? What does that really say about your team? Or you can keep him around and continue to hammer out the issues and see if they can continue to fix them, which seems like that is what the Titans are going to do, and by keeping Colt Anderson. And we've seen this work to extent so far. Obviously, the punt blocking issues at the beginning of the season were something that, you know, was very prevalent, and you know, having punts blocked back-to-back weeks, that we said on this show as well, that is a major problem that you need to fix. And for weeks, I believe 3 onward, knock on wood or whatever you want to knock on that you're listening or watching this podcast on, it's been pretty good. They have addressed the issue, and the issue for more or less has been fixed. But as Brian Callahan says in this clip from Monday that I'm about to show you, because they had to fix that area of the punt game, you're going to have other holes open up. And so here's what Brian Callahan had to say about the special teams, kind of their performance and how it's progressing this season.
Longer, give us a chance to cover, because the reality of it is we made some personnel changes on that punt unit after the block punts early in the season, try to settle it down, which we've done. They've done a really nice job protecting the punter. but we've sacrificed a little bit of speed and coverage ability with some of the bigger bodies in there to protect the punter. And when you do that, the ball's got to hang up further, and we have to have a chance to get down the field and cover. Obviously we're down some gunners because those guys are now, playing more football for us with Nick Westbrook, and Jarvis was one of the gunners too. And, so we got to do a better job of complementing each other in each phase of the punt unit. And right now we're not doing a good enough job of that. Our hang time, I think, is averaging somewhere around 4.0, which has got to be higher than that, and to give ourselves a chance.
And I think that, for my money's worth, is a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why this team is still having a lot of difficulty on special teams. You allocate a lot more of those issues, which you were having with guys like Julius Chestnut and Jack Gibbons to begin the season. You allocate more manpower to protecting your punter. Well, that's going to leave you pretty high and dry on the outsides, especially when you trade DeAndre Hopkins and elevate Nick Westbrook-Akine, especially when you have a guy like Jarvis Brownlee Jr. playing a lot more reps. You can't afford to have him go down on special teams in an accident or, injury, I would say, on that side of the ball. And so what you're left with is what we saw, Mike Brown, and for what it's worth, a lot of pretty bad Gabe Judy Lawley special teams plays on Sunday, where you had guys really just going down the field and totally not being able to square up with the block and just getting absolutely torched by Khalif Raymond. And so when you talk about these issues, these are things that kind of you maybe could have seen coming in hindsight because of what the Titans have gone through with churning their personnel. And so I think while it is fair to say that Colt Anderson may not be fit for the job long term, I do think that he should be at least given the chance to fix this, given the personnel issues that they had.
I kind of like Colt Anderson. Let's just put it out in the air, and everybody's just going to get pissed and chime in the comments right away. But I kind of like his history, where he came from, who he learned under, and I don't know that firing him actually makes special teams better. I don't think it does anything but satiate the mob with their pitchforks kind of deal. So I'm all for. I'm never really a fire the coach guy to begin with. I wasn't even a fire the coach guy with Mike Vrabel. I thought he would get another chance to kind of turn things around. And then the more we learned behind the scenes, it kind of starts to make sense. Like, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. But I'm just not there with Colt Anderson when you've seen this unit make adjustments, change, and improve. You mentioned getting bigger to go out there and protect the punter better. That's happened. They put different personnel out there and they solved the problem. No more block punts, right? Just to boil it down as simply as I can. They changed the personnel. They solved the problem. Maybe we should have a little accountability here for Ryan Stonehouse, because if they're telling him we need more hang time, and that's the root of the problem here, hey, buy us a little bit of time to get down the field, keep the ball in the air longer, and he's going out there and he's not giving them hang time, what are they supposed to do? I mean, you can lead a horse to water, that sort of thing. So I think we can hold Ryan Stonehouse accountable here and say, hey, if this is the problem, that's the solution. Do it. Just do it, man. Execute better. I just don't think firing a special teams coach 7 games in at this point is the move when you're seeing this team adjust, make changes, and solve problems in real time.
Yeah, I agree here. And Eddie in the comments saying, I don't like blaming Stonehouse, but this is 2 separate staffs who have talked continuously about hang time. And I think it's a question that you have to bring up. As much as we've talked about Ryan Stonehouse being this great new age punter and one of the best in the league, it's been a lot because he's consistently booming it downfield where, that's great and all when you put them down in their own 10-yard line or something like that. But if you're doing it with such low hang time, how is that really feasible if you don't have like Tyreek Hill speed on the outside? And so I do think that if there is adjustment that needs to happen with Colt Anderson and how they're approaching this, but I think it also comes down to the personnel. right? And this is the
Yeah.
same argument we can have with Brian Callahan and we can have with the players, right? You can blame a lot of the turnovers and you can blame a lot of the scoring on Brian Callahan if you want. But at the end of the day, is Brian Callahan the one out there that is fumbling the ball after making the catches? Is Brian Callahan being the one that is forcing Mason Rudolph to kind of contract a little bit of boneheaditis that from Will Levis and throw the ball in ill-advised spaces? I don't know if that's really an answer, because if you were to fire Colt Anderson, that still doesn't address the problem that is Ryan Stonehouse needs to execute better. And we can continue with this conversation at a larger scale with, the head coaches in this team as a whole. But real quick, another clip from Brian Callahan talking about after he kind of played down the idea that Colt Anderson and kind of confirmed that he probably was not going to get fired this week. Here's what Brian Callahan had to say about Colt Anderson on Monday.
And the wherewithal to understand where the special teams issues are. And then you got Anthony Levine in there with them, who also has seen a lot and played a lot under John Harbaugh in Baltimore. So those guys got great special teams experience. They understand what they're looking at and what there is, and we have to do a better job all the way around. But those guys know special teams, and they know what the solutions are, and we have to make sure we implement them and do them because I think they're good young coaches, but again, they're young coaches too, just like there's a couple of us are, and we have to do a better job all the way around.
And so I think they have to do a better job all the way around with this specifically. CW in the comments says, is it also Stonehouse's fault? They have gotten 3 punts blocked, and also their kick return coverage is awful. No, and this is also a thing that was brought up, right? With, this may be a reason why you should have kept some of the guys like Hassan Haskins around, the special teams demon they call him, who is actively saving blocked punts now for the Los Angeles Chargers, who forces a safety instead of a recovered fumble in the end zone in that game against the Saints. Why you should have maybe kept guys like Eric Garrett around. But at the end of the day, those personnel changes, like you can bring some of those guys and keep them on here, but what does that do to the rest of your roster? And so I wonder, all these fixes that you want to make could potentially make other problems down the road here. And so CW says, is it the coach's fault if he is not listening to their coaching advice? They should cut him, so they are allowing it. At the end of the day, you can only coach so much, right? Like you could put any special teams coach in there. I don't see how that really lies in the coach's position if the player is simply not going to execute. And would they cut Ryan Stonehouse? I don't think so, but obviously they're going to have to. They did with the punt blocking unit, and that's what Colt Anderson has done. Now that this has become the biggest problem here with the special teams, it is now on Colt Anderson to adapt and change with the special teams unit, and I think that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also bring up a clip that Paul Kaharski shared on Sunday of Mike Brown at his locker saying, it's not like we don't know what we're doing. It's another layer to this thing. If players were acting confused, if they were saying, yeah, we're not really clear on our assignment, we're not, nobody knows where we're supposed to be, that's one thing, that's coaching. I don't have an argument against that, but he's up there saying, like, everybody, like, we know what to do. We understand it. Communication's clear, and we're just not doing it. And ultimately, I mean, you talk about narrow windows in the NFL, man. You've got a short time to get this stuff right. And if it's not humming on all cylinders, time will pass you by like that. And that just feels where we're at right now, where these guys just aren't getting it right. I do think, I'm glad you mentioned this, that I do think that it's proven costly to have cut so many core special teamers, people with valuable special teams experience. I think that's part of it as well. But again, that's, you can survive some of these issues if everything else is okay. And right now, everything else is not okay. So it magnifies each individual issue even more. So I don't know, man. I just come back to this coaching staff. Brian Callahan does not sound like a guy that's in over his head to me. He sounds like a guy that understood what was wrong on special teams to cause the punts to get blocked, So he made a change in personnel. They got bigger, and in turn, they got slower. So they needed a little more hang time. It sounds like a guy to me that understands exactly what's going wrong with special teams, and they're working to fix it. But you only get so many opportunities before the moments pass. So I don't know. If we start seeing this stuff extend beyond this season, I think we can have the conversation. But right now, I'm just, from where I sit, I'm patient with this whole staff, this regime.
Yeah, and I think, most teams would do well to be patient. I understand, and there's a lot in the comments here calling for Brian Callahan's head, calling for Colt Anderson's head. Like, at some point, we're going to reach a boiling point, with coaching cycles that with these teams we've seen in the past, like the Panthers last year, like the Panthers, I feel like 2 years in a row. This has been a lot of Panthers. When you have a team like in the Urban Meyer one is different, I would say, but in the recent past, when you've had coaches in their first year get the can in 6 to 7 games, we haven't seen those teams really improve. You can look at the Urban Meyer situation, which I think was a lot different, but still bad to begin his tenure. You can talk about Doug Peterson maybe making a few improvements, but where are the Jacksonville Jaguars now, right? Like they had one miracle playoff win a season or two ago, and then you look at what they've done now, right? It makes, and this is where we're getting to here. I'm not quite sure what fans expected from the last 2 weeks to deserve this outrage, right? I think you can look at both weeks against the Buffalo Bills and you can look against the Detroit Lions and say, yes, this Tennessee Titans team is flat out going to get beat because every single aspect of this roster, the Bills and the Lions are better on paper. And so they go out there and they do the simple things like execute. And then people are like, oh my God, like the better team won and they handily won. Let's fire the coach. Let's fire everybody. What is that going to fix now, right? It really makes no sense in terms of cohesion with your team trying to build for the long-term future and success of your team to already give your head coach the can that is trying to build up his program in his first year. It makes no sense. If someone wants to explain to me in the comment section what firing a coach 6-7 games into his tenure really does for your team that has no direction, has no really hope for the future right now, because if you were to do that, they simply don't have hope, because then you're pivoting to another direction. I find this sentiment just maddening, in my opinion.
Yeah, same here. And I think the darkest timeline version of this, they do fire Brian Callahan. Well, then what? Let's look back at the last two regimes. Mike Mularkey was canned when it would have been justifiable to give him a shot to turn things around. I mean, I wasn't the biggest Mike Mularkey fan. I know the understanding is that he refused to fire some of his head coaches, and that was that. But you could have kept Mike Mularkey around after winning a playoff game in the fashion that he did. It was justifiable to keep him around. John Robinson, for all the shit people talk about him, it was justifiable. You could have easily made an argument that, hey, let's give him a class, a free agency class, another draft class to turn this thing around, and we'll see what we have then. Certainly justifiable to have kept Mike Vrabel. I think you'd be firing Brian Callahan in a situation where it is justifiable to move on from him, because you could point to the record and say it. And all of this is in the name of playing better ball and putting a better product on the field. And I think if you can Mularkey when it's justifiable to keep him, if you can J-Rob when there's a justifiable reason to keep him, if you can Vrabel when there's a justifiable reason to keep him, and if you can Callahan when there's a justifiable reason to be patient and keep him, I think that's a worse situation, because then you start thinking, I don't think you guys actually know what it takes to get better football. And that's why I preach patience here. I still think the bones of this thing are pretty good. And if they start executing on some of these plays, Titans fans are going to forget all about this. That's the turning point. If they can just start clicking and hitting some of these plays and getting there, I think that's how this thing starts to turn around. And quite frankly, I'm not going to be surprised to see this team win a couple games they shouldn't down the stretch. Like I've watched
it's gonna piss some people off when this team wins 3 or 4 more games.
I've watched every single one of these games at least 5 times, the broadcast a couple of times, the sideline angle of the all 22, the end zone angle of the all 22. There's plenty to be optimistic about, but and I'm not trying to be condescending or tell anybody how to be a fan. Like, it's your prerogative to do what you want to, but I don't think that this team is too far off. I think you hear Brian Callahan in press conferences saying we're close to executing. There are so many plays left on the field that if they start hitting on some of those, this thing, the engine's going to turn over and the car's going to start, basically. So I'm in a position where I'm going into every game saying you're probably going to lose. Something catastrophic is going to happen. It's going to cost them the game. They're just going to stink until they can sort out some of these personnel issues, until they can get better players in here, more free agents, another draft class. And maybe then we can talk on down the line about pressure, hot seat, that sort of thing. But for now, I'm just going to watch this team suck until things start to click and the chemistry starts to get there.
Right. At the end of the day, you could fire any coach, and you could, Lewis in the comments here says, what does firing Brian Callahan do right now? Shows we want a winner. Sure. You could bring in prime Bill Belichick if you wanted to.
Everybody wants a winner.
Everybody wants a winner. If you bring in Brian Callahan or prime Bill Belichick right now, I promise you that there's nothing he can do to make these players execute more than what Brian Callahan's trying to do right now. It's plain and simple. This team just continues to not execute when they need to, right? You could bring Bill Belichick in. What is that going to do? I don't think that makes Calvin Ridley not fumble the ball. I don't think it makes Chigakonkwo not fumble the ball. I don't think it stops Jack Gibbons or Julius Chestnut earlier in the season from not stopping that blocked punt, right? Like, unless there's something we're not seeing behind the scenes. But I do think that, it feels like in this day and age of NFL, we are beginning to, just like boomers tell, attention spans are gone.
Yeah,
we're continuing to we're starting to lack patience in our football team, and we need instant gratification with our teams. If we don't have a Patrick Mahomes and we're not winning the Super Bowl, because and I think that's what people obviously may have set themselves up for, right? You spend all that money in free agency. Oh my gosh, that means we're now one of the best teams in the league. We're now one of the sneaky best teams in the league. Well, I feel like on our show and a lot of shows, we kind of were banging the drum that, okay, you bought a lot of nice, shiny pieces, but there are still too many holes on this team to make them a certified contender in 2024.
Yeah, and even then, the conversation was like, yeah, they could be. They added a lot of talent. They could be pretty spicy. They could be pretty fun to watch. But I don't think when it came down to record prediction and faith and all that, I don't think anybody was too confident that this team was going to get things right out of the gate. And man, you're talking about 2 weeks in a row against 2 teams that could be playing for the Lombardi by season's end. I don't know. I'm not too bent out of shape about it.
That's very true. And so I hate to say it, but I think this might be a nut up or shut up moment for a lot of us backing Brian Callahan, as they now go on to play 4 games, the next 2 against, vastly different competition. Next week you go up against a very beatable New England team who's riding high off a win that they very needed, considering that they had a lot of that. If you want to talk about what losing the locker room looks like, that's what you see in New England, right? You hear the rumors and you hear things leak out of the locker room. From me being inside the locker room, from being surrounded with all the people on the Titans beat, I have not heard one thing leak out of that locker room that gives me any indication that there is a lack of leadership or disbelief with Brian Callahan right now, like they have in New England.
Say it louder, JT. You're in there. This is not just us speculating. You're in there. You're literally in there. And I think the messaging in the locker room after games, when you guys are in there snapping the videos and talking to the guys, it's a pretty consistent message. It doesn't sound to me like there's dissent among the ranks. And hearing Peter Skoronski talk about it, there's confidence going into the games each week. I don't think a team that is just divided and rattled and turning on their head coach is that in sync with one another?
Yeah, I think the message that continues, I haven't heard it in 2 or 3 weeks, but I do think that this message of no one's coming to save us, so it's a matter of executing. And if you do, then you can start to build some confidence. But once again, like, you're at rock bottom every single week. The only thing you can do is try to go up from there. And I feel like that's a solid message that continue to preach with them. And it seems like one that is well heard and well respected around the locker room. And so you do have an opportunity to kind of turn this season around at least a little bit. And as we have so many people in our comment section saying, how's the tank going? We're ready for the tank, right? Like, we're going to get to, I feel like, week 14 and 15 with this team probably maybe having 3 wins or so, and people are going to start going crazy when the Titans look like they can actually play some competitive football. Like, no, this is not what we wanted. Like that's the thing. And you look at the next 2 games specifically against New England, who is the 32nd ranked offense behind your 31st ranked offense. That sure is going to be fun. I can't believe that wait. I'm willingly going to that game and covering that game. And then you go and look at them play against the Los Angeles Chargers team, a Minnesota Vikings team that is very good. I think that is a tough matchup. But then you go to Houston in a always divisional games are always weird. And, the Houston Texans losing Stephon Diggs, yet another piece that they won't have. Their offensive line not looking great. Like, that's a winnable game any way you look at it, because they are your divisional opponent. And so I think Brian Callahan has an opportunity to gain some of that trust back with the fans, specifically with the upcoming schedule, because I think however you want to slice it, we're now at the point in the season where most of the games against the world beaters are behind them.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to bet. I haven't started my New England tape study. I'm probably going to get started on that later tonight. But
without Drake May, might I add, I believe it's going to be Jacoby Brissett, unless Drake May were able to miraculously get out of the concussion protocol. But that hit that he took didn't look great, and him being instantly out like that doesn't bode well for him.
Yeah, but like, from what I've watched the broadcasts of this team, I mean, if the Titans show up in this, but they should comfortably beat the Patriots. I mean, this is, I think the perception of how bad this team actually is distorted because of the quality of the last 2 opponents. But I think this is a game that the Titans do have to go in and win. Now, we might be having a different discussion next week if the Titans end up losing this game. But I mean, this is, to your point, like, this is where, okay, we took our lumps, right? We took our lumps against the Lions, the Bills, the Packers. We've gotten these teams behind us. Even the Colts are in the playoff mix, which they've got some problems of their own.
We'll talk about that.
And the Chicago Bears are looking pretty good right now. Dumb mistakes aside, like, they've gotten some of these quality opponents behind them. Now's where you look at the schedule and say, okay, almost like a relieving sort of way, like, this is where we kind of find out what we're really made of, because at 1-6, I do think the season's likely over. I don't think it's exactly breaking news. I'm not going out on a limb by saying that the season's over. Now's where we find out what we're made of. And if you can band together and you beat these teams that you should be beating, like the New England Patriots, they're going to play the Jags later on as well. If you start beating those teams and then you get a little frisky with one of these that you're going to be an underdog to, I think maybe the fan base starts to cool off a little bit and things start coming around.
Yeah, then we get into the conversation that now they're throwing away their future because we can't get Carson Beck or Jalen Milroe or someone like that, because that's always going to be a fun discussion. Got to give a shout out real quick to Sinkers Beverages, our lovely sponsor. If you're enjoying this episode and hate what we're saying and feel like you need a drink from everything we're saying about the Titans' optimism, who heard of that? But you got to head on over to Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville. They've been serving that community for over 40 years. They are a 4-time winner, Best of Nashville winner, Liquor Store of the Year. Got to join their in-crowd for special benefits, allocations, and tastings they do every so often over there. They simply have the best beer, wine, and spirit selection in the city. Got to give them a follow on all of their socials at SinkersBev. And can't get out there, no worries. They deliver to you. Simply search Sinkers on Uber Eats because they deliver the booze to you. They drive so you can drink responsibly, I might add. Also have to give a shout out to Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, who have been serving that location for over 50 years. Got to help support local businesses, local supporting local. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages for sponsoring the show. All right, Stoney, let's look at some of these comments here, answer some of these questions, and kind of get this discussion going with some of the people in the chat here before we move on to maybe another heartbreaking offensive lineman loss for you in your tape evaluation preseason. I know that's something, and then we'll talk about the AR and what that means for Will Levis and company. We'll start with Eddie saying hiring a guy named Colt who played for the Colts and who was on that ever famous special teams play. Which is funny. We should have seen this coming. He says, I'm actually in the Stoney camp of letting the coaching staff figure it out. Daniel Frazier saying on the Lions game, you never think you're going to give up 52 before the fourth quarter, in fairness. I do agree there. Ed also saying, more credence to my theory. If you could name a stat that if a team does X, they are 49-1, the one would be the Titans. And that's certainly something that I feel like in my betting trends this year, like this trend is too good to lose. And of course, it's the Titans that lose that. Gershon saying he stands with Stoney here.
Thank you.
Brandon saying, I like what was said on Titans Talkback. I wish I could have seen the game between the Lions and Titans without the special teams issues. They were going blow for blow there for a minute. So, and like awesome. They were also with in the Bills game, like the first half, they executed well. And then Denard Wilson verbatim said they simply did not execute in the second half of the Bills game. He talked about how they would get burnt one play, and instead of just shaking it off and moving on to the next play, it really felt like this defense started to get down on themselves and just make mistakes and costly errors. And so if you just are able to execute for 60 minutes, I think you're going to get a better product. And the Titans their personnel is simply not done that. Joey Turner here saying, speaking of Rudolph, can we at least all agree that he is not one of the best bench reindeer in the league that we thought he was going to be in the offseason? I really, I feel like I've been on this boat more than a lot of other people. The second people started calling for Mason Rudolph, I thought it was silly and foolish, because after watching Mason Rudolph film last year, that it was pretty easy to see that Rudolph willing this team to a playoff start, and he played pretty much the same way he did in that playoff game against the Bills last year. And so, I think that's which is another reason why, Brian Callahan, I think they're trying to get back to Levis as soon as possible, because if you start to see these guys execute a little bit more, especially on the offensive line and the wide receiver room, you might get a little bit of a bump here with the Will Levis, who has taken a breather for 2 weeks here. Kenneth saying, I think Kayla Anderson on local radio said it best. If you stick your neck out for Colt Anderson, it's now on Brian Callahan's head for keeping him. I do think that's fair. It's a two-way street for sure. But I do think that preaching patience right now for a 1-6 team will prevail, and is the better move.
I wouldn't expect any firing to be done in the middle of the season. I mean, it strikes me in these media availabilities. Certainly not.
Certainly not with a first-year head coach, right? Like, I think the logical thing that could come closest to a firing that has been a problem for this team has been the concerns about Brian Callahan being able to manage both head coaching duties and play calling duties, which I think is a fair assessment. Like, I think he is a good play caller. And I think when you watch the tape, some of the looks are there. They're just simply not executing. But then also, on the other hand, there have been times where his clock management and that side of the game has just not looked up to par with what you need as a head coach. And so I think that's a reasonable spot where you could see some change within the coaching staff this year. But I think I'm with you that firing, it feels a little too bold for a 1-6 team right now that is pretty much looking to the future.
Yeah, I think you just need the full sample size to get a real evaluation. And I think you've got to at least give guys on your staff a chance to make things right. And if they make those things right, it's all gravy. We can build upon that. But if they don't, then I think you can reassess at the end of this season, because it's not going anywhere now. And there's nothing. I don't think there's anything they can do that's going to sparked this massive turnaround.
Yeah, Hurricane Lou saying the gardening suggestion was prescient, Stoney. So I believe people are taking you on your advice to get out there.
Thank you, Lou.
And go garden. I think
It
the
helps
coffee
me.
shop one as well. I do like sitting down at a nice coffee shop on a Sunday, especially
Just
when
reading a book.
NFL's not, but obviously my job allows me to watch this team, unfortunately. So Tyler Kitt saying all the fans that are anti-Cali because they're not winning now are also going to be mad on Sunday if they beat the Pats. Gonna be a lot of Cali can't even tank right. It's a very flip-floppy. If your team, which is it's the tough thing.
I don't know where this mentality came from, JT, because it's the same. What it reminds me of is the way that the Houston Texans fans are butthurt about the Oilers uniforms. It's like they were wearing these uniforms 15 years ago and more recent than that. Like, why? And I don't remember Texans fans like banging down the door to claim these uniforms back in like the late 2000s or the 2010s. Like, nobody really cared about it then, but now all of a sudden they're mad about it. And it's similar. That's the reason I'm reminded of that, is because it used to be like it was out of the question. Like, you would have to have a head coach murder somebody in the middle of the season for them to be fired in the first half of the season. In their first year, rookie head coach, it was kind of understood, hey, this is going to take some time. We just hired a new coach. It's probably not going to be good right away. But things have just evolved, and where did this mentality come from? We flipped on this somewhere along the way, and I don't get it.
Social media, man, with those kids, those youngins nowadays.
Those youngins,
like, that's what it is for sure.
Get off my lawn.
Ed saying in the comments here, after watching Rudolph, not sure if Levis is the match in this dumpster fire or just another oily rag. That's an interesting way to put it. Before we get to Will Levis conversation in his possible return this week, there were some Titans transactions that were pretty interesting today. One being that release from the active roster, wide receiver Mason Kinsey. I do think that one is not nothing. Considering that it could potentially be Bryce Oliver's season. Now, could he clear waivers and they bring him back? I think that's all but likely with this team, obviously, unless, maybe this is the final goodbye to the Mason Kinsey experience, which would be pretty sad. I highly doubt it.
You can't get rid of him. He can't be killed. He's a cockroach. But
yes,
I'm here. Cycle. Let's keep these players rotating. Let's get evals on everybody we can.
Yeah, I do think the guy who would benefit from stepping up here would be Bryce Oliver in this particular spot. With a guy like him, see what he has. He flashed with Malik Willis early in the season. Malik Willis has looked good. Maybe the evaluation of the Malik Willis to Bryce Oliver connection was a two-way street, and that if Malik Willis is able to cook up there in Green Bay, maybe Bryce Oliver is also able to cook in regular season play. But the Titans also made a couple of other moves. Signed to the practice squad, Abdullah Anderson back, Justin Hardy, and Arlington Hambright. I saw Zach on Twitter earlier say that this is the new I forgot it, Quentin Bohanna.
Yeah.
Arlington Hambright is the new witness protection Quentin Bohanna. Like this guy is not an NFL player. He is just he's just the guy that they're trying to harbor from whatever ill fate he has out there for him.
Yeah, it sounds like a mob boss in Gotham City or something like that. We're going to see Arlington Hambright pop up in the next season of The Penguin.
I love it. But the biggest one here, which is you maybe need to, you've grieved so much already over John Njoku and other guys like that. Cole Spencer has been released from the practice squad. Stoney, your final thoughts, maybe a parting word or two from Cole Spencer in the short run that he had during training camp.
Well, I liked him a lot. I thought he had a shot of making the 53-man roster at the beginning of the season. It wasn't to be. They kept him around on the practice squad, and hopefully this isn't goodbye forever. It's just we need a spot this week. We need a spot right now, and they'll keep him. They'll keep him on speed dial. God, I am a boomer. They'll keep him on speed dial. What am I doing here? I'm hoping they keep they keep up with Cole Spencer and he ends up back here, because he was a really fun developmental guard prospect. And I think he could have developed into something nicely. They had a lot of those kind of guys this year, and I think it's a testament to the scouting department and Rand Carthon's ability to get guys in here that have the traits to be something interesting. Cole Spencer was a really athletic guy. I thought he had some good tape this preseason. Wasn't in the cards for this season. They needed the spot somewhere else.
Yeah, and so that are the transactions right now. Will be interesting to see how many of these guys actually matter, but I just wanted to bring up some of the ridiculous names that they're signing.
Cold-blooded.
Yeah, I mean,
cold-blooded. We don't think you're going to make a difference. We just want to make fun of your names.
Yeah,
is that what we're doing here on the Hot Read now?
That's what we did with Quentin Bohanna. Like, he's taking snaps. He's taken like 4 snaps in Seattle since then. So, happy trails, Quentin. Hope you're doing well, whoever you actually are, because Bohanna's not a real person. All right. Let's talk about this Colts situation, because it was to end off the show, because I think it does leave some, it is a cautionary tale for the Titans and Will Levis in this kind of transition year to see what he is, and kind of ties into our conversation earlier about wanting to be rash in our decision making to fire coaches, personnel, et cetera, et cetera. So we look at what happened earlier today when the Colts announced that they are benching Anthony Richardson, whether that is a operational benching to kind of have him take in some of the game from a guy like Joe Flacco, we've seen execute very well already this season, or if it was more of a motivation benching, with him taking himself out of the game and doubling down on that sentiment after the game, saying he was out of breath. I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback do that before.
It's pretty bad.
Nonetheless, this was a outright benching. And even though we can kind of call the Will Levis maybe a shadow benching, which I don't believe to be true, given the play we've seen from Mason Rudolph, the Anthony Richardson situation is an outright benching. And this was an interesting snippet that came out earlier today from the Indianapolis Star. Quote, Indianapolis may say that the Colts plan to go back to Richardson when he's ready. In reality, NFL teams have rarely gone back to a young quarterback they have already benched. According to an informal study by Indy Star, out of the 74 quarterbacks drafted in the first round since 2000, only 2 were drafted, inserted into the starting lineup, benched, and then restored to the starting lineup. Alex Smith with the 49ers and Rex Grossman with the Chicago Bears. Not a great list, and certainly not looking great for a guy like Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, that's
However,
that's not good company.
When you look at what they're doing right now, obviously you can look at the box score and say this is not conducive to success with what Anthony Richardson is doing. But when you watch the tape, I don't believe that Anthony Richardson is anywhere near the potential that he can be. But you still see the flashes every single game of the player he can be, and it takes a little bit of reining in. And once again, the word we continue to talk about, patience with your young quarterback to kind of reap the benefits of that. And I thought that this clip from Chris Ballard, their GM, earlier this offseason was pretty pertinent into what they did today. So here's what Chris Ballard had to say about their quarterback, who they've now benched before this season.
Let's don't expect him to be Superman from day one. And I think history shows there's not many of them that are Superman from day one. Some of them it takes 2-3 years to become a really good player. It's probably the one area where I've seen it, and this is even before me even being in the league, but it's the one area where teams that the pressure for these guys after 1 or 2 years back, 10, 15 years ago, guys would get year 3, 4, 5. Think about it. Terry Bradshaw, he might not have ever played in today's NFL. It took him time in Pittsburgh. We got to let these guys develop and play, and they're going to have some struggles, and then they got to work through the struggles. And eventually their talent, the more they play, their talent will come to life.
Sounds like a very big 180 from what where they are now with the Indianapolis Colts, and whether this was a Jim Irsay kind of off his rocker, maybe on the good making this decision and forcing the hand in this operation, or this is just an organizational shift. It has created a big firestorm for an organization. And so, and as much as Titans fans want to laugh at it and say, look at the Colts, what are they doing? It's not out of the realm of possibility that this is close to the same situation that Titans fans are witnessing in Tennessee. And that being that, maybe after giving up on Will Levis early, may come to bite them in the butt towards later down the line in the future of this organization. And I think it's a cautionary tale to what we've continued to preach here. Like, yes, we are still, as much as we think that the evaluation is over, like, there is still time for him to develop and mature into the quarterback that, the flashes have shown. However, that takes time. And during the time, you are going to suck. And because we continue to lack patience in this league, there may be a chance that you're never going to get to the spot you need to be with a guy like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson. But if you don't embrace that suck from time to time, you're never going to find your answer. And so I think with what Anthony Richardson showed today, that at least coming back from the shoulder injury, Will Levis is going to be given yet another chance to finish out this season. And, I think that he should be awarded the patience and kind of the time to see if that ability can flourish throughout the rest of the season, because when it gets down to it, by the end of the season, he will only have played about 17 to 20 games in his entire career so far, which is still very, very young for a quarterback.
Yeah, I would caution Titans fans to get their hopes up, because I don't think they have a Joe Flacco on this roster.
True.
And
yes.
to recklessly speculate here, I could definitely see a situation where the Indianapolis Colts took a look around and they said, hey, man, the rest of the AFC kind of sucks right now. So we're right in the thick of this wild card hunt. If we can sneak in, who knows what could happen? The old, Cinderella run, if you will, could be on the table for us. Let's pause the evaluation of Anthony Richardson, and let's get the guy in there that can be a quick, decisive, efficient passer that's more consistent, that we don't have to suffer the growing pains through. We can kind of do what we want to do on offense, play our game. And hey, maybe we can turn this season into something, because the competition's not really that great right now. And I could absolutely see this Colts team with Flacco at the helm kind of squeaking into a playoff spot, maybe making a little bit of noise. So I don't know. I wouldn't get my hopes up that there's benching the quarterback is going to provide some big spark for the Titans, because I think we've seen enough of Mason Rudolph to know there's not that much difference between the two right now. So I think Titans fans, you're probably going to get stuck with more of the QB evaluation.
Yeah, and I think let's say hypothetically, if people, what would, this is interesting, because like, what would you want more? To pause the like, if you had a Joe Flacco type, or if Mason Rudolph was playing to that level, right?
Yeah.
Do you want a 9-8 squeak into the playoff season where you still don't have a long-term answer at quarterback, and probably are not going to find your answer this draft cycle because of where you're going to have your pick? Or would you rather just continue the evaluation? Certainly, for the Colts with their ownership and what they've gone through right now, I think that that's where with their organization. But for the Titans, even if they did have that guy, I don't know if that's the path to genuine success, because with a team like this, I do think Amy Adams-Strunk's intentions with this team is to build a long-term contender that can be competitive year in and year out. And the only way you can do that is if you find that viable starting quarterback. And so, as much as the 9-8 Cinderella run could be feasible and you could still sneak into the playoffs, I don't see that being beneficial to your long-term success.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think in theory, in practice are two different things. I think in theory, yeah, I want the team to bottom out, and I want them not only to get the quarterback that they want to turn this thing around, but also you're going to be picking earlier at the top of every round in the draft. So I think you're going to get better players, assuming that you draft well, which I think is fair to assume. I think Rand Carthon drafted pretty well this cycle. I didn't agree with all of the day 3 picks, but I think he did a pretty good job. And the class of undrafted free agents that he brought in, I thought had some pretty intriguing traits. So, I want to give this regime the chance to draft at the top of every round next spring. I think in practice is where you're seeing it, the issue, because I sit down in front of my TV every Sunday, and even though I say the Titans are going to lose this game and it's probably for the best to increase their draft position, I still catch myself rooting for the team and cursing and throwing things when they inevitably implode. So I think there are a lot of fans that we're seeing people go through this in real time right now, where the idea of a tank, just let this thing bottom out and get the better draft picks, sounds good, but then you actually have to live through the tank, and you have to live through the 1-6, and you have to live through the 52-14s. And that's pretty tough to do for a team that you love.
Yeah, I do agree there. And I feel like I don't feel like I'm cursing and cussing. I'm more of I elect to watch the Titans games if I'm like Homelander in that one scene where he's in the movie theater, just emotionless, just like
Yes.
like this, like that. That's really my extent here. Ed Henry, I think 9-8 with Rudolph would instill confidence that Callahan can develop quarterback and would be confident in them choosing the next quarterback. How does that really show, exactly that he can develop a quarterback? You brought in a guy who has already 6 to 7 years of NFL experience and has never really once looked good. Like, if you could will this team to 9-8, I think that says more about your defense and the things you're putting around the quarterback than what Mason Rudolph is. Certainly, I think last year, that team, that Steelers-led team that sneaks into the playoffs last year with Mason Rudolph at the helm, certainly it was more because of Mike Tomlin and that staff and what they put around Mason Rudolph than the quarterback himself. So as much as maybe success gives him a longer leash, I don't know if it really shows that he can develop a quarterback necessarily. And not to mention that, once again, like Brian Callahan, he found this job attractive because he thought that Will Levis could be an intriguing guy to develop. It doesn't necessarily mean that they brought him in because this is the guy to develop. Once again, Brian Callahan is not the one who drafted Will Levis, right? He is not tied to Will Levis in any aspect, I believe. And so, I really don't think that you can count on true Brian Callahan quarterback development until you allow him to get his guy. And maybe that comes next year with whoever they take at the beginning of the draft because they continue to suck, or maybe you start to see some real growth towards the end of the season with Will Levis, and then you're even into a more heated discussion and doing circles around that. And that's really something we can't see until at the end of the season. And so I think that's where my head's at the end of the day.
Yeah. I would add to Ed, I'm already confident in Brian Callahan's offensive acumen. Maybe not specifically the develop a quarterback part of it. I also think it's kind of funny how when you talk about Brian Callahan's track record with quarterbacks, it also happens to be with quarterbacks who are pretty good. So maybe you could find a quarterback that's pretty good and go from there. I don't think 9-8 with Mason Rudolph really does much for me. I'm kind of just bottom this thing out and go get your guy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, one more thing, doing the old Stoney Keeley here before we leave. You had a tweet earlier today talking about someone. Was that the 104.5 chat? I believe.
My tweets. We're talking about my tweets. Great.
Yeah, your tweets earlier today. I don't know what YouTube chat you were in this morning, but they were talking
cover two.
Cover two, where they were discussing how Mike Keith might be a curse upon the Tennessee Titans, and the reason why they have not found success. However, Mike Keith 17 minutes ago tweeted unprompted. It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Hashtag Titans up. So there you go.
That's sick.
Yeah. So my Keith is aware of him being a curse, I guess, or maybe.
Oh,
not. I don't know.
man.
But all right. I think that's where we're going to end our show here today. We'll be back on Friday talking about fully dissecting, is Mike Keith the reason of all the Titans' troubles or not? That's a big discussion. Probably a one that's more interesting than previewing a Titans New England Patriots matchup. Probably. I don't know. People after this episode, you can tweet at me and Stoney. And what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear me and Stoney discuss why Mike Keith is the reason the Titans will never win a Super Bowl, or previewing the Titans Patriots? That'll be the question of the week. But until Friday, thank you once again to Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages for sponsoring the show. Give them a follow at Sinkers Bev. And for Stoney Keeley, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will talk to you on Friday.